Africa and California to present bat research in bat conventions, International Bat Research Conference, and North American Bat Research Convention. She has worked in countless projects about bats, but also has worked with other fields in wildlife, birds counts, water quality projects, iguanas, shrimps, etc. Her goal is to educate and motivate people in Puerto Rico and the world to care for bats to promote the conservation. And that's it. Welcome and thank you for being here.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here presenting you with this workshop today. I will be talking a bit about bats in Puerto Rico and the overall role internationally of bats as pollinators and how important they are. I'm gonna go ahead. All right. So what I like to start with is explaining a bit of what is an actual bat, right? It's this weird flying animal thing, but we don't really stop and realize that it is a mammal, and it is the only mammal that can fly. There is no other mammal that has this ability. We have sugar gliders and flying squirrels, but they don't really fly. They just glide. So bats are very special because of that. They're the only mammal alive currently in the world that have this unique adaptation to fly. And what I like to point out is that scientifically, the whole family of bats, they fall under this category called Chiroptera. And Chiroptera means hand and wing. So we can almost deduce that this means, like a hand adapted to be a wing, a hand that functions as a wing. And this splits into two main categories, which is Microquiroptera and Megaquiroptera. The Microquiroptera are the more recent species, and they're known for being smaller. Their eyes are very small, and they are usually the bats that we associate with echolocation. Bats that fall under this category have a very wide variation of diet. So we have some Microquiroptera that consume insects, others consume fruits, others consume nectar. We have bats that consume blood, frogs, other bats. So it's a very varied diet within the species that are found under the Microquiroptera. But then we have the Megaquiroptera, which we see here in this picture, which are the very cute flying foxes that we see when we Google bat. And they're usually found in what we call the old world, and they're very in big numbers in Australia, for example. They have flying foxes. They have really big eyes, and their diets are not so varied. It's very rudimentary, very basic fruits and nectar. It's almost exclusively fruits and nectar. There's no flying fox that consumes meat. Another thing is that it is thought, right? It is theorized that these are the older species, so their echolocation isn't as specialized. They use more of audible clicks rather than ultrasound. So they're just more basic in function. They aren't active during the night. They're active during the day. They have very big eyes, so they don't have to rely. They still haven't designed that echolocation because they don't need it. They're active during the day. Their skin is tougher, so they can hold the sun and the heat. But we'll talk about a little bit about the heat later. So these are just the two main differences, but here in Puerto Rico and in all of the Americas, all the species fall into Microquiroptera. This is just a bit of bat anatomy. I just like to show this picture because when we usually see bats in person, they're flying in the dark and we just kind of see silhouettes pass by. And we really need to see what we want to take care of if we want to not be afraid of it. So here we have the body. There's a tail membrane that can also help us deduce if it eats insects or fruit, because bats with a very pronounced tail membrane uses it to scoop up insects into its mouth, whereas a fruit-eating bat doesn't necessarily need that membrane. And at least in Puerto Rico, it's a pretty solid way to identify the species and its diet, just looking at the tail membrane. Another thing I like to point out is how we see 4 fingers within this membrane, this skin. They're very elongated, but they are just normal fingers. They have wrists, they have elbows, just like us. And the one finger that does stick out is the thumb, and it is used for climbing, for moving it around, and for grabbing its food. And it's kind of its little hands in the own hands, because most of their hand is a wing. All right, here I talk a little bit about adaptation and how there's 1,500 species so far of bats in the world, and a lot of them are very unique. You know, you would think that all bats look the same, but they're in fact very, very different. And what I like to say is that almost all physical attributes of each species is almost 100% determined by its diet, right? So you have this bat here with a super long tongue. You know, that means it feeds on nectar. You're not gonna have a bat with a super long tongue that feeds only on insects. But then we have this top picture with the long tail membrane, like I mentioned before. We can see that it might use it to fish, to catch fish, or to catch insects. And then we have this other picture with the thumb pads and the really large ears. Large ears is a very important adaptation for listening better. So if we have insect-eating bats that catch or have to catch insects that fly really fast, their echolocation has to be really, really good. So their ears are bigger and bigger and bigger, and even crazier out of proportion. And the little thumb pads help, they kind of act as false feet. So they can crawl around on leaves or poke onto surfaces better rather than just flying. Here I talk a little bit about echolocation. It's one of the biggest things, you know, you think of bats, you think of sonar, you think of echolocation and how they can see in the dark. And it's really, really cool. And how it works is that they emit, just like us, how we make sound. They make sound just like that, but in the frequency that it is what we call ultrasound. So ultrasound is any sound that is above 20 kilohertz. So we humans cannot hear it, and these sounds go and they emit that noise, and it hits, let's say here, like this picture, it hits off. And once it comes back, they can interpret where that thing is. And it's very awesome, because you would think, like, how would that affect, since the insect is constantly moving? But they make up for that. That's how awesome and specialized their echolocation is. All right. Bats of Puerto Rico. I always like talking about bats of Puerto Rico because it's where I have the most experience. We have 13 species in this island, which is actually very, very amazing in terms of biodiversity. I've talked with scientists all over the world, and they say that they thought we only had like 3 species. And then they're very surprised when I say we have 13 and we used to have more. So as a very tiny island in the Caribbean, we are very biodiverse, which is really, really interesting. And we have all sorts of bats, all sorts of sizes and diets. We have fruit eating, nectar eating, insect, and we even have our huge fish eating bat. So we have very interesting bats here, and it's very biodiverse. But today we are specifically talking about pollinators. So I'm going to focus a lot more on our Phyllostomids. It is a family that we have here, and they all have that characteristic nose leaf, which is like that little antenna peak that you see in almost all of these pictures. And these are all fruit-eating bats. The two on the bottom eat fruit, but they're really, really small, so they also consume nectar. So these species are the most known as pollinators. Insect-eating bats can also be pollinators because they're always flying. They can be, they can lay and rest on a plant, so they can also function as pollinators. But these are the ones doing the large hauls and really moving that everywhere. And this is another one that didn't fit in the previous slide, and this is our very own native fruit bat, or scientific name Stenoderma rufum. It's very much like the Jamaican fruit bat. The first picture here to the left on top is the Jamaican fruit bat, which is not native, as the name implies. But this is our native fruit bat of Puerto Rico. It is very well known for its cute white marks that's natural, that's its fur like pattern, which is really pretty. They're smaller than the Jamaican fruit bat, and they have brown eyes. Jamaican fruit bats have black eyes, so they're very cute in my opinion, and they're also pollinators. Another thing that I would like to point out is that we can clearly see here the thing about the tail membrane, right? This is a fruit-eating bat, and see how it has almost no tail membrane? That's exactly what I mean, because it doesn't need it, so it doesn't evolve it. So it's very interesting, and it has that characteristic nose leaf, which helps as an antenna for the echolocation, and the whole nose seems almost like a landing pad for that sound to come back, so they can interpret it. Now, why are these bats important? Well, we are celebrating Pollinator Week, but bats are known to be important for several reasons. The biggest one, I think, is controlling pests. They eat a lot of insects, insect-eating bats. They eat tons and tons of insects, and they save a lot of money in the agriculture business in pesticides, because if we were to remove them, we would have to deal with all those tons of insects still being alive and still reproducing. So they do that. They're also important because they disperse seeds. Not only do they pollinate, but also the fruit that they feed on, they disperse the seeds. And something that's very cool is that bats have the tendency to eat away from the tree that they got the fruit from. So it's also ensuring that the seed is dispersed and dropped off far away from that mother tree, making that reproduction of the tree in a wider range. Like, it's just wider range, more effective, because if we just had a bunch of saplings in one place, they would be competing with each other. But with the way that bats work and their behavior and the way they eat, they disperse these seeds very far apart. Therefore, it's just more likely that you're gonna have more trees instead of competing with each other. And the reason why we're here and celebrating pollinators, well, bats pollinate. Bats pollinate a lot, and we don't give them credit for that. A lot of the food we eat isn't really pollinated by birds or by bees. A lot of what we eat is pollinated by bats. So if we didn't have them, we would be without food, and a lot of other animals in the ecosystem would be without food. So we really need to also protect the bats with just as much energy as we give bees and butterflies and other insects. All right. This is two cute pictures that we took a while back, capturing bats in one of our projects. And this is a Monophylla dreepmani. It is one of our smallest bats, and it feeds on nectar. So it is one of our pollinators. And we can see in these pictures that they have yellow, it has like a yellow dust. It is full of pollen, right? So they enter these flowers, and they're feeding on this nectar, and they come out full of pollen, and they go to other flowers, and pollination occurs, right? So pollination is the transfer of pollen from the stamen to the receptive parts of the flower, where we can find the ovule. So this is what's happening, right? The animal goes in, and this is just the same with bees. They go in to find food, but then they get covered with this pollen, and while they go to another flower to look for some more food, that pollen gets crossed, and that is the reproductive cycle of a flower. So just like bees do it, bats do it too. It's a process that requires external forces, animals, but it's not always animals. Sometimes it's wind, sometimes it's water. Bees can do it, butterflies can do it, birds can do it, beetles can do it, bats, and more. A lot of our food depends on pollinators, and these are just a few examples because I like always bringing the fact of how do bats contribute to us? Like how can we see this in a perspective of like, wow, we really need bats to live, right? So they pollinate mangoes, they pollinate bananas, plantains, guava, guayaba, passion fruit, the agave plant, which is the plant needed for tequila. So if we didn't have bats, let's say, we wouldn't have tequila and we wouldn't have all these products derived from all these fruits. And they pollinate a lot more. These are just a few examples. And we can even think how bats contribute to a lot of businesses that are essential to just the world, you know, like what if we had no mangoes? You know, that would be very, very devastating. What if we had no bananas? What if we had no tequila? And it's interesting to point out, but it motivates a lot of people. So to start educating themselves and to start getting into bats, we mentioned them that, so it helps and it works, so we mention it. And here I have a picture of a cute little bee. It's full of pollen, and it's probably going to pollinate a bunch of flowers, but they work only during the day, and there are flowers that are active during the night. So I say that bees are like the guardians of the day, working all day, but the bats are the guardians of the night. And they continue the bees' job while they go home. The bats come out and they do the nighttime shift of pollinating. Pollinating never stops. Nighttime moths and beetles also are pollinating around this time, but bats tend to pollinate flowers that are almost adapted specifically for bats. So if we were to take out bats, no other organism would replace bats. So that plant would just die off because it wouldn't have anything to pollinate. Here, I forgot to translate half of this page. Okay, so all of them, it says all of them are important. Bees prefer flowers that are active during the day, of course. They're usually yellow, white, maybe with a little bit of purple because their vision is ultraviolet. So ultraviolet spectrum colors are what stand out for bees, and they usually depend on the flower having some kind of landing pad, some platform, big petals, round petals, not slippery, so the bees could safely land, get the nectar, and leave. But for bats, it's a little different. Flowers must be active during the night, and the colors must be visible during the night. And a lot of colors that attract bats are usually red, reds and purples. It just attracts bats more. And these flowers are usually really, really big. So it's almost a completely demographic. You know, bees cannot take over the job of bats. So we need to protect both because bats can't take over the job of bees. They're both essential for pollination. We can't just live with only one of them. We need to protect all of them. And here is a quote I like to say about pollination. Pollination is the most important mechanism to maintain and promote biodiversity and life on planet Earth. Pollination is essential, and if we don't have the organisms to do this pollination, we are going to lose life, and we as humans won't be able to live, animals won't be able to live, it would just be catastrophic, and that's why we need to really protect the pollinators. They're very important for our food chain. Here, okay, so not only do they pollinate, they usually consume the fruit of many trees, so they disperse seeds, and it's an important interaction to secure survival of plant species. Different species of plants have evolved to attract a specific organism, so it's what I mentioned before, right? We have these flowers that are adapted only to this organism. So if we were to lose that organism, no other organism can hop in and replace it, right? So we have flowers that are adapted for bees and insects. A bat can't pollinate it. So if we lose bees, we lose those flowers. But the same thing happens with flowers adapted for bats. You know, if we lose bats, nothing can replace that, not even us, because it's been tried with the agave plant, with tequila, and artificial pollinations isn't as effective as just the natural way. So it's really important to keep these populations in check. This is a cute diagram I like to show. This is a tree and it produces fruit. The bat eats it and defecates. Another thing about seed dispersal that's really cool in bats is that they don't have to perch to poop. So they usually eat, they grab the fruit while flying, they go somewhere else like a palm tree to eat, and then on their way, let's say back to the cave, they defecate. So this whole process of taking that seed is really wide range. So when you're trying to reforest, let's say reforest like reserves after a hurricane, bats are really the ones doing that extensive wide range reforestation. Bats, just like birds and butterflies and bees, are very important because they promote and accelerate seed dispersal. The connection between fauna and flora is essential for quick forest discovery. Here in Puerto Rico, we study weather events a lot because we have hurricane seasons, and we've been having very strong hurricanes, and I'm going to also talk about that later. And it's very connected, right? We have a hurricane, we have some deforestation because of this hurricane, which is completely natural. But what really helps it and restores it is this teamwork of the birds and butterflies and bats. You know, it's all in the teamwork because we have all these different types of plants. Not one single pollinator can do all the work. So it's a beautiful, natural effort, team effort that really restores our forests. And a bit more information about pest control. One bat can eat up to 600 insects an hour. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates that the U.S. saves $3.7 million annually in pest control, which is a lot of money. Farmers are using bats a method that's natural and way cheaper than buying pesticides. So what farmers are doing is that they're building these huge bat houses so bats can go and live in them right in the middle of their crop, of their field. And these bats go out at night, they eat all the moths that would usually destroy complete crops, and they also poop on these crops, and so they're fertilizing them. So it's two uses that are very awesome for bats in agriculture. And another thing that we don't really talk about their importance is that they can also be a source of tourism. And here in Puerto Rico, we're a very tourism-oriented place. Tourism is just in Puerto Rico's heart. You know, we really rely on that. You know, we have beautiful beaches, caves, and natural reserves, but we also have bats. And this picture here is in Texas, I believe. It is a very famous bridge with a huge colony of bats, and every night, you know, the sun is setting and these bats come out, and people just go from all over the world to see this beautiful just event that happens every night. And I have this slide here to kind of motivate you guys to practice that bit of it can just be internal tourism, you know, like go to a cave and just see the bats. Like, wow, that's so amazing. See it as a beautiful thing and as a thing that can bring business and as a thing that can bring in people. For a good cause as well, to motivate people to take care of these cool, mysterious creatures. These are just a few more pictures. They're kind of blurry, but it's this huge bridge, and they have a lot of bats coming out. Now I'm gonna talk a bit about climate change. Climate change is happening at a really, really fast pace. climate change is supposed to happen. It's natural. What's not natural is the pace that it is rising in. The temperature is supposed to rise every few thousand years or something, hundreds of years, but it is rising every year. Every year we've been breaking records, and places as cold as Siberia have hit 100 degrees. So it's been heating up all over the world. And here are just a few effects on bats directly of climate change. The first one is flying foxes are overheating in Australia. Australia is naturally a very, very hot place. And now they're hitting temperatures that are so high that even heat-resistant bats are overheating and dying. There are thousands of them just collapsing every day because of these heat waves, and it's getting really bad. They've reached up to 23,000 bat deaths related to just overheating and heat stress. So that is really, really bad, and they've never experienced so much death so fast at this rate, and it's all because of the rise in temperatures. Another bad thing is that while the Earth keeps heating up, all sorts of organisms are going to try to keep moving to the border that's cold, right? To this range that's cold. So they start moving north at such a rapid pace. And now we're going to start seeing these overcrossing of organisms in places where they're not supposed to be. And especially in the Americas, right? We have bats that are a bit from South America, and they're going to be like slowly moving up. And that's not going to be very good because we've seen it in foxes, we've seen it in wolves. You know, when you start introducing this organism that originally wasn't there anymore, it's usually bad news. So we do not want that, but it's happening. Another thing is that specifically in North America, we also have the problem of hibernation. These bats hibernate during winter, but now it's getting so hot that their bodies are waking up thinking it's not winter anymore, and they come out and waste all their energy stores because there is no food available, because the plants are on another cycle. They haven't completed that cycle. There's no fruit, there's no insects, and so bats die because of waking up from hibernation too early. So this is being desynchronized, and it's causing, and it will cause, thousands and thousands of deaths of bats and just a lot of other organisms if we really think about it. Another thing is that with more heat comes more heat stress, and with more heat stress we have more animals that will get sick. So with sick animals moving and migrating to other places, it's going to spread disease, and with hotter temperatures it's going to spread fungi, and fungi like white mold syndrome. It's going to pass more infectious diseases, and that also implies us. How will we be affected with this massive migration of species looking for colder temperatures while being sick and transporting all these different pathogens that they may have inside them? And how will that affect us, especially amid this coronavirus situation? You know, like, what does that imply, and how did global warming sort of affect that and cause that? And another thing that's especially relevant here in Puerto Rico is the more severe weather events. Here we have hurricanes. It's natural. We're supposed to have hurricanes. Without them, the world wouldn't function. We need hurricanes. But what's happening is that since the earth is hotter, hurricanes are becoming more and more severe. They are very strong now. And what's happening is that we're having these category 4, 5 hurricanes destroying complete colonies of bats and not giving the populations of bats time to reproduce for the next season of the next hurricane season. So we have these populations that haven't even been able to recuperate from Hurricane Hugo, and so they've been hit with Maria. So we've lost a lot of bats, unfortunately, because their reproduction is very slow. And as the earth warms up, we're just going to have stronger and stronger events like this. So bat populations will certainly be affected in that aspect as well. They won't even have time to regain their numbers for the next season. And it's really, really sad. All right, so now we're gonna do some myth busting. Um, these are just a few questions that pop up when I say that I like bats. The first one is, are they rodents? Are they flying rats? And here I have a super funny picture of of a rat saying, OMG, an angel. They are not rodents. They are actually genetically more alike to us. You can see it in their arms. You can see it in their little leggies. Their hips are completely rotated, and rats do not have that, so they differentiate like that as well. Faces are not very similar, so when we really stop to observe these bats, we realize that they're not very alike to rats. Bats and rats are not the same. Are they blind is another very frequently asked question. They are not. They just have very small eyes, and just like us mammals, we do not see at night. But let's say like cats, they developed a sort of night vision. But bats, instead of developing that, they just developed the acoustic part. They developed echolocation, just like whales. So they're not blind. It's just that that's not the most evolved part of their body. You know, like we can't see at night, but we're not blind. Is that we can't see in the dark. Same thing goes for bats. If you shine the light on them, they're going to see that light. If they're out in the daylight, they can see that light, but their eyes are not very used, so they're not very specialized. Another question is do they get tangled in your hair? They do not, at least not on purpose. A lot of people think that bats come to attack us. Like if we're near bats, they're gonna come in and swoop and just get tangled in our hair. It's not gonna happen. And let me tell you that I've sat in front of a cave right at the peak of bat exit, hundreds of bats coming out, and I've never gotten a single bat stuck in my hair. And I used to have long curly hair. So trust me when I say that bats really don't want to touch you. Once they realize you're there, they'll quickly dodge you. Their echolocation is really, really good, and their flying is really, really good because they're adapted to avoid those obstacles. They fly in tight spaces in forests. So unless it's a complete accident somewhere, it's very rare for a bat to get stuck in your hair. The one explanation that I have for it is that I've noticed that some bats are very opportunist, and they see that we attract bugs, and what they're trying to do is not attack us, but actually feed off of those bugs that are near us. And that's like the closest explanation for bats getting tangled or hitting us on accident while flying. And the last question is vampires. Like, what is that? Do they suck? Oh my god, all bats suck blood. It's so evil. Well, the truth of the matter is that there's only 3 species out of the 1,500 species of bats that consume blood. And they're only found in one range, which is Central America, South America. They're not found anywhere else in the world. And they usually consume blood of cows, of pigs, farm animals that typically don't have hands that can grab them and attack. So they're not going to be sucking off the blood of us or of something else like a cat that can fight back. It's usually really large animals that won't even feel them while sleeping. The thing that does happen is that now we have these neighborhoods that are near these forests, and if the bat finds a human sleeping faster than it finds a cow, let's say, it's going to feed off of the human. It just makes sense in energy wise and effective wise. It's not going to waste more energy when it has food right here. So that's sometimes happens, and people usually just don't notice because they're very, very small, but that does have health implications. But yeah, it's not a lot of species that consume blood. We have more bats that consume fruits and nectar and insects versus bats that consume blood. I'm going to talk a little bit about conservation and what can you do and what have I done with my team in terms of conservation of bats. The first thing is research. Here's me untangling a bat from a mist net, which is the trap we usually use when catching bats. You need to know the organism you're going to protect. You need to research it. You need to study its behavior, its morphology, its anatomy, its range, its everything. And for you to be able to conserve it and educate others, it is key. You know, you can't argue or persuade someone to take care of something when you don't know almost anything about it. So that's why research is so important. And to this day, you know, we're still conducting research. We're seeing if they can have migratory patterns. We're tagging bats for recapturing. There's a lot of cool things going on. There's also projects about bioindicators to see if they can be indicators of pollution and other things like that. So here in Puerto Rico, there has been a lot of projects going on. They've been on pause for Corona and quarantine, but it is being done. Here's another picture. This is another type of trap. It's kind of blurry. That's also me with long hair and the orange and white. That is a harp trap. And it's usually used in caves, so it doesn't capture that many bats. A mist net you can catch easily, like 20 bats if you're in front of a cave, but then you need to untangle them, and it's a mess. So we don't use mist nets near caves. We usually use these harp traps, which are just smaller. This is an acoustic monitoring device, which is also used in research. I like to show it to say that studying animals takes all sorts of fields. It's not only biology, it's not only science. It takes art, it takes math, it takes engineering. It takes all sorts of fields of study to come up with equipment to study these animals. And it's not only bats, it's any type of animal. You know, you could be studying sound, and then the next thing you know, you're developing a system to monitor bats and echolocation. So it's really cool, and I like to point it out, you know, because we have some people that are like, oh, but this isn't my field of expertise. But it's like, no, you always have something to contribute when it comes to conservation. You know, teachers can be conservationists, volunteers can be conservationists, artists can be conservationists, writers, sound design, anyone can help for conservation. Usually once we capture the bat, we identify it, we identify the species, gender, approximate age, we write down if it has any ectoparasites or any injuries, and if we need to grab some data or take a sample of, for example, fecal sample or something like that, or we need to tag it, we do it. But usually this process takes about 15 minutes. So we usually capture the bats, take the data we need, we don't harm them, and we release them back into the wild right after we take that data. It's usually really, really fast because we don't want bats to get shocked and die on us. This is a picture that shows a bat with really worn down teeth, which tells us that it's a really old bat, which is another thing that we look for when we catch bats. Usually young adult bats have really, really sharp teeth, and if it's a baby, it will be really rare to catch it because a baby bat doesn't fly. So they stay in the caves or they stay on the mom. So the few instances that we do catch babies is because they're attached to the mom and we caught the mom. So usually all of our bats are adults. We just need to determine if it's a young adult, or elder adult. So here we have an old adult bat. Another thing that we do for conservation is what I'm doing right now, educate, right? I started when I was 11 years old, and I got educated by experiencing and by practicing. But even at that young age, I didn't waste any time in educating my peers, my family members, my friends, anyone that I could tell or anyone I could talk to about bats, I will talk about them, and I would tell them the importances. I am not, by far, I'm not an expert. I know a lot, but I'm not an expert, but that didn't stop me from saying the few things I didn't know and moving that message of taking care of these animals and taking care of the forests and environment in general. So that's another thing one can do to conserve bats, and it's one of the biggest things we practice here in Puerto Rico: education, bringing this information to students, to families, to all ages. We have a festival in Puerto Rico for bats, all about education, because that promotes conservation. And with that, I say thank you. This is the end of my workshop. I hope you all learned a little bit today. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw them out now. Stop sharing.
I have a question. With this type of glove in the expedition, like you have been bite by one of the bat or no? Like every time you have like these precautions, or how is the process?
All right, so if you're referring to handling bats, we always use really, really thick gloves. Usually we don't have a problem with them trespassing the glove or breaking the glove, because even though it's very unlikely in Puerto Rico specifically, this is a statistic from Puerto Rico, no bat here has been found with rabies. The few cases of people getting bit and being checked, the bats don't have rabies, and here we don't have a lot of big animals that can pass rabies, so it's very rare for us to have rabies. But even with that, we still use gloves because we don't want to come into contact with the saliva if they do bite us. Another thing is that it hurts when we're touching them and handling them. They're usually not very happy, so they try to bite, they flap their wings, and sometimes accidents happen. I got bit by a bat. It trespassed the glove because it was a gardening glove and it had a mesh, and it bit into my skin, and we had to do the whole rabies vaccine protocol because I didn't notice until after I took my gear off that I was bleeding. But that's a whole other story. Usually we use leather gloves that are really thick, and we don't have that problem. Any other questions?
I wanted to ask a question, but okay, that's okay. You can do that, Amanda.
I wanted to ask if there's any predators for bats here in Puerto Rico.
Yes. The main predator here, a natural predator specifically, is the boa puertorriqueña. Other than that, we have, let's say, the guaraguao, the red-tailed hawk, right? But the introduced predators are cats, and they consume a lot of bats, and it's really bad. But the natural predators are the boa puertorriqueña and red-tailed hawk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
About investigation related programs that are here in Puerto Rico, is there any in particular that you
Give
could...
me 1 second because it started to rain and I'm outside. So
Oh.
let me transfer. Let me
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Give me my, okay. Technical difficulties. All right. So what was the question? What was the,
I wanted to ask if there are any programs here in Puerto Rico that you can do volunteering in bat investigation.
yes. I'm gonna see if I can write it in the chat. Oh, give me that. I got rain. I got water on my computer. Okay, so basically you have the Programa de Conservación de Murciélagos de Puerto Rico. It is almost like an umbrella organization. It is of the University Interamericana de Bayamón. They have a Facebook, they have a website, I believe, as well. You can find their email and you can get orientated. They have meetings, I think every month, but nowadays I don't know how that's working 100% because of COVID. They usually have projects going all over the island, so you can just get in touch with them and say that you're motivated and you want to help and you want to volunteer, and they will let you know, like, oh yeah, we have these activities and we need help and this, and you kind of pick where you want to participate in depending on your region.
Okay. Beside that, is there any age restriction in order to participate?
Okay, so that would depend on the specific activity. So I suggest that you really get in touch with them and with the person in charge of the programa right now, the president. Her name is Janire. I could probably send this stuff to Carla and then she can forward it to you guys. Depending on the activity, there's usually not an age restriction. Let me remind you guys again that I started when I was 11. They thought I was 14, and technically there wasn't an age restriction, but I was there anyway. So it's, pero eso era, but that was because of, that project specifically was with National Science Foundation, and they have their protocols, so it's very individual for each project. Usually the worst that can happen is that from a certain age down, you can't touch bats. Like, they won't let you manage them, or, but you can help set up the traps, move around the equipment. You can still participate, but you won't be managing or touching around bats, just for security reasons, because the rabies vaccines are not very designed for kids. So to prevent that and to prevent problems in terms of insurance and all that, the worst that they can do is tell you that you can come along, but you won't be touching any bats. You will be seeing them though, and it's still a great activity. Exactly, I started at 11 and I didn't touch a bat, but I was so happy just seeing one in person. It was really, really cool.
Thank you.
So there's usually not an age limit, and I've personally attended all sorts of ages, little kids to old adults, all sorts of people from in between, university students, people who are just curious, people looking to do something new, school trips. So depending on the project that's going on, you can find what's best for your group or for the people that are going to participate.
It would be nice if there could be any group for kids in school related to bats someday. That would be nice, actually.
They have done it. It's just that since I'm living in Vieques right now, I haven't been very active with the organization, so I don't know what they've been doing recently. But we've done a lot of school-related activities. The festival, for example, we usually have we capture bats in the festival at nighttime, and we have kids come around, like really big groups, to see bats, and it's really cool. So I just suggest that you get in touch for an activity, and they have a lot of volunteers that can give workshops, and you might find the projects that's going on near you.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Yo creo que
Anyone else has a question?
vamos a la vez. Ajá.
I have another question. Venus, is difficult to identify each species of bat, or how is the process that have you been with all this research?
Okay, so in Puerto Rico, at least, it is very, very easy, and of course it comes along with practice to identify the species. They are usually very unique. Almost all of them have like a really distinct face. So you can say like, oh yeah, this is this. I think the trickiest is with the frutero común, the Jamaican fruit bat. They can be mistaken for the native fruit bats because they're very similar. The only thing that changes is their coloring. But again, that comes along with practice. And usually you can, like for example, the murciélago de las flores or Aerophila bombifrons, you can even hear it. Like that species is very vocal. So even the vocalizations, you can be like, oh yeah, that's a murciélago de las flores. So with practice, it becomes really, really easy. And 13 is very biodiverse, but it's very easy to memorize. There's not a lot of species compared to, for example, birds. So it's very easy to identify them with practice.
Thank you.
All right.
Creo que te voy a hacer la última pregunta, pero te la voy a hacer en español. Ya que
Okay.
hablamos español, pues.
Exacto.
Nada, es que ayer teníamos como que una discrepancia, se puede decir, algo así, no sé, en cuanto a lo de los depredadores del murciélago. La culebra cuando se posa, la boa, cuando se posa fuera de las cuevas, te pregunto, ¿ella busca el murciélago, espera que el murciélago llegue donde ella, o solamente cuando lo roza, o qué?
Okay, pues les voy a explicar. Usualmente la boa se posa como si fuese una raíz o un branch, ¿verdad? Una rama de un árbol. Se queda bien estática, como que se congela ahí mismo y básicamente espera que empiecen a salir los murciélagos y como que ¡chup! Y los coge y no sé si es cuando roza, no sé si es cuando lo siente, porque también, ¿verdad? Las culebras tienen el heat sensoring. ¿Cómo funciona eso 100%? No lo sé, pero algo bien importante es que cuando salen los murciélagos salen un montón. Así que ellos esperan esa salida, ¿verdad? Cuando está bajando el sol, porque es más probable que cojan un murciélago. Están como que pescando ahí, como que ¡hop! Y tratan de coger y lo más probable van a coger uno porque están saliendo tantos, tanta cantidad bien concentrado que se les hace, ¿verdad? Bastante fácil coger uno. Y las culebras no tienen que comer mucho, que posiblemente coge uno y ya se fue. Esa fue su comida por la noche. No sé no creo que se queden con la boca abierta. No lo he visto a ese nivel, pero sí he visto en cuevas culebrones que se quedan posados como si fueran ramas. Y se ve súper cool porque se quedan ahí congelados 10, 15 minutos esperando que empiecen a salir los murciélagos. Y ahí esperan hasta el momento oportuno.
Ok, pues gracias por aclararlo. El punto.
Ok.
Ya, quedó aclarado, ¿verdad, Reinaldo?
Sí, ya.
Mala mía, pero está bien, ok. Nada, es que tuvimos la experiencia, yo no me acordaba, pero pues Reinaldo menciona que sí, que tú estabas, pero tuvimos la experiencia de ir allá a Cueva Convento.
Sí, yo estaba así.
Sí, pues tuvimos la experiencia y pudimos ver el atardecer de murciélagos y de verdad que eso fue otra cosa. Una
Sí.
cosa bien bonita, de verdad que sí. Así que eso mueve el turismo, como tú dices, así que está súper chévere. Pues,
En la, Sí, otra pregunta que también surgió en la presentación de ayer, es que como nosotros tuvimos esa experiencia del atardecer cuando salían los murciélagos, pues yo sabía que por tamaño ellos van saliendo, ¿verdad? Por ejemplo, pues el insectívoro sale primero, después el frutero, después siguen así. Que quizás tú puedas abundar un poquito más, ¿verdad? Explicando eso, ese proceso interesante con tu
Ok,
expertise.
ok, pues sobre eso, los murciélagos van saliendo de la cueva. Usualmente las primeras especies son los bigotudos menores y bigotudo mayor. Esos dos empiezan a salir bien temprano en la noche porque en ese momento que está bajando el sol, que hay un montón de mimes y cosas que nos están picando, es como que el pico de mosquitos y de mimes y de todo, pues ellos salen a esa hora para aprovecharse de eso. Lo otro es que ellos vuelan bien rápido, así que si hay un depredador, por ejemplo como una ave, ellos pueden esquivar más fácilmente que, por ejemplo, un murciélago más grande, más visible. Por eso es que ellos van saliendo más temprano. Después empiezan a salir los frugívoros, ¿verdad? Pero es más porque mientras más oscuros, más protegidos ellos están, ¿verdad? Porque los fruteros ya son más grandes y pues son más visibles, así que si salen en pleno, ¿verdad? Si solamente como quiera está bajando ese sol y como quiera hay luz, ellos son más visibles que, por ejemplo, un murciélago insectívoro que es bien pequeñito y se puede confundir con otros pájaros. Que, ¿verdad? Pues mientras más grandes, como que más tarde en la noche salen. Lo otro es que, por ejemplo, los que se alimentan de néctar tienen que esperar a que esas flores abran, ¿verdad? Y pues eso es también todo un ciclo y abren de noche y hay que esperar eso. Si ellos salen antes de y esas flores no han abierto, no van a tener comida. También salen más tarde, ¿verdad? Dependiendo de su comida. Y los pescadores en realidad no sé cuándo es que salen, pero no salen durante el día, salen más tarde en la noche. Pero así en relación a los otros, no sé si sale antes o después, porque también depende del sitio, del lugar, y es algo que no se ha estudiado mucho, ¿verdad? En Puerto Rico específico, como que qué especie sale, como que en qué orden salen las especies. Es algo que es un poco variable, que no se ha estudiado mucho, es más simplemente observación por nosotros los murciélagueros, ¿verdad? Haciendo estos proyectos en la noche.
Excelente, gracias.
Ok.
Bueno, pues Venus, muchas gracias por sacar
Gracias a ustedes.
De verdad que excelente charla. Y gracias por todo. Diste 2 charlas, así que de verdad que estamos sumamente agradecidos contigo. De verdad que sí.
No hay problema.
Y
Para eso es que estamos.
Sí, y siempre se aprende algo nuevo. Así que gracias por sacar de tu tiempo, de verdad.
Gracias a ustedes.
Pues nada, gracias a los que se conectaron y a los que se mantuvieron y a los que han estado con nosotros también, ¿verdad? En la charla. Pues ya culminamos este fin de semana ahora con la charla de las 5 de la tarde. Que bueno, si tienes el tiempo, ¿verdad? Nos gustaría que pudieras unirte a nosotros, que es de murciélagos también, que estoy segura que te va a gustar si tienes el chance.
Ok.
Sí. Y pues nada, de verdad que muchísimas gracias y espero verlos allí ahora a las 5 otra vez. Vayan, estírense y hagan lo que tengan que hacer y regresan. Nos vemos, cuídate.